in 10 seconds.
10 seconds.
We're live now. Yes, go.
Okay, so I think we're live. Welcome to Tell Me Something I Don't Know online. I'm really, really pleased to be joined. I'm really pleased that we can do this for a start. I'm really pleased to be joined by some fantastic speakers, as well as Jade from Primary, and some support from Jim. Hey, Jade. And people who've done Tell Me Something I Don't Know before may not have met Jade. So Jade is an assistant curator at Primary. Really pleased that they are with me to help with this. If you've not been to a Tell Me Something I Don't Know before, we've been running them for about 3 years. It began after a project that Ian Nesbitt ran called Ek-uh-nom-iks, and it was about ideas around sharing of knowledge and kind of the kind of knowledge that we value. And Ian came up with this kind of format as part of that project, and I've taken on running it since then. So this is event number 14. So we've had over 60 speakers so far, and I'm really pleased always that the talks are so varied, and our speakers are so varied, and yeah, it should be an enjoyable evening. I'm trying my best to make it feel like that we're in a room together, which is really hard to do on Zoom. If you're watching on YouTube, or hopefully you're watching on YouTube, I think that's the only way to watch actually. But anyway, you can ask questions during the chat using the chat function, and so when we've had speakers and you have questions to put to them afterwards, you can type them in there and I will read those over to people. What else? We have a live captioning that's hopefully working okay. If I speak slow enough, I'm speaking a bit too fast right now, but that should help. And in terms of the lineup, I'm just gonna quickly run through everyone that's speaking, and then I'll let them introduce themselves when they do their talk. So first up will be Shan Vincent. Really delighted that Shan, who is involved with Next Gen Movement, who've been super busy across Nottingham in the past couple of months doing really important work. Super pleased that Shan's joining us. Then we've got Jagdish Patel, who's involved in a project local to Primary in NG7 at the People's Pantry. It's a photography project. Then we've got Anaya and Sapan. Hey, you're going to be telling us what you've been up to during lockdown. Anaya and Sapan spoke a couple of years ago at Tell Me Something I Don't Know. So they're kind of veterans now, kind of know how it goes. So we're pleased to have you back. Then we've got Angela as well, who's joined us. Angela works at Majatu on Alfreton Road, also local to Primary, and we're really pleased that she's going to be sharing a talk with us. And lastly, we've got Ravi as well, who will speak last. So I think that's everything. Shan, are you happy to get going? And I'll let you introduce yourself. You're going to make, yeah. Cool.
So I'm Shan. I'm one of the co-founders of Next Gen Movement. I'll just give a bit of background. So Next Gen Movement are made up of the organisers of the Black Lives Matter protest that's happened on Forest Recreation Ground. So it's myself and 2 other friends. Next Gen Movement came about after the protest, when we realised, we didn't want to just do the protest. We always knew that we were going to carry on and do what we can within the community to start making change. The reason we called it Next Gen was because it's about focusing on the next generation, giving a voice to the youth and the general community. And eventually, when we get old and move on, we want to pass it on to literally the next generation. So it's an ongoing thing. Hopefully we won't have to, because these issues will have been solved by then, but who knows? So that's just a little bit of background about Next Gen. So today I want to speak a bit about the lack of diversity in the workplace and microaggressions. I work in the corporate world, so obviously I do Next Gen on the side, but I am very much a 9-to-5 girl. So I've got experience of lack of diversity in general in corporate business, but also just general any kind of business, and also personal experiences of microaggressions as well. So when I initially think about lack of diversity in the workplace, I tend to think about Black people and other ethnic minorities that have lower level roles. So if you think about when you go into a nightclub or a bar, the toilet cleaners are usually black women. Or if you look at stores, the security is usually a black man. It's just typical that they tend to have these roles. Other ethnic minorities obviously also are included with this at lower level jobs. With the security thing with black men, since the whole George Floyd thing, I've started to really get into the intricate details of, you know, lack of diversity, racism, and, you know, systemic racism as well. And I had this thought the other day. I was in town and I saw a black security guard on the door of a jewelry shop. And I just thought to myself, why the security guards tend to always be black men? And it kind of leads back to, you know, this stereotype that they're aggressive and, you know, they're seen as intimidating. And it's just interesting that we don't really think about these things, but with the way that the world is at the moment, I think it's really starting to make us think of these things, and I think it's important to do so. Another thing in terms of lack of diversity in the workplace, especially when it comes to kind of my workplace, is that black people and other ethnic minorities don't tend to have senior positions. At my workplace, there's not one black senior manager. I think there's an Asian senior manager, but it may only be one. And also on the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Board, there's not a single ethnic minority or black person, which to me just doesn't make sense, because, you know, how can you implement things to create more equality and inclusion if you don't include the people who are oppressed? It just doesn't make sense whatsoever. So these are the things that, you know, Next Gen as well are actually really looking at and focusing on and seeing what we can do to try and, you know, rectify them. Another issue in the workplace is, you know, that BAME people tend to use make-up numbers. So when discussing opportunities, you know, you see on the application form, we encourage people from black and other ethnic minorities to apply. But realistically, I don't know how other people feel, but I don't want to see that on the application form. I want to know that I'm applying for this job, and the only thing they're thinking about is, can she do this job? Is she suitable for the role? And it's just, it's almost like tokenism. And I think that's something else that we need to stem away from, because that plays into the inequality, especially within the workplace, because it's literally pointing out that there aren't enough opportunities for these people, and they're doing it just for statistics, basically. Like I said, it should be a case of just giving the jobs because of the skill set. And we've been talking, and me and the other co-founders of Next Gen have been talking about the fact that we think ethnicity should be removed from an application form, because what relevance should it really have? It shouldn't have any relevance to the job whatsoever. And that leads us to the recruitment process within businesses. I think blind CVs would actually be a really good idea, in terms of, like, you don't know the person's name, you don't know their ethnicity, all you know is what would they do if they was in this situation that is vital to the job. But also another thing, I think an issue with that as well would be, it wouldn't allow you to understand that, you know, certain people from certain backgrounds would have had circumstances when they were younger that might have limited to gain the same skill set as their white counterparts. So for example, if you need a certain amount of experience for a job, your white counterpart might have that. They might have a family business, they've been able to get work experience easily. You might not have had the opportunity, you know, you might not have grown up the same. So I think little things like this are important to think about at the same time, whilst trying not to focus too much on race, but maybe focusing more on upbringing in the background. And I think another issue in the workplace is how racism is handled when there is such a lack of diversity in the workplace. So personally, from my experience, I'm not going to go too much into it, but I've had a situation at work where I've had to go to HR. Obviously, it's been to do with race. It wasn't dealt with appropriately, I don't think. Obviously, they would think different. And another thing that's really uncomfortable when it comes to this kind of thing is when you're one of only, if not the only person of colour in a working environment and you experience something like that, it's so uncomfortable to bring up to people. If, you know, every person is white and you're the only person of colour and you're trying to explain to them why this is not okay, it's like talking to a brick wall sometimes. as much as they want, some of them want to understand, they just don't, and they wouldn't handle it in a way that, you know, another person of colour would, because they don't actually know the implications that it can have mentally. You know, it can create trauma, even if it's to them not such a big deal. That's why I think it's important to have, you know, a variety of people in these high level positions. You know, we need white people, we need Asian people, we need Black people. We need to all just come together and really stand in unity. And that's the only way to stamp out, you know, racism, systemic racism in particular, when it comes to, you know, discrimination in the workplace. And that also leads to my next point about microaggressions. I think it's important that people really start to pick up on microaggressions in the working environment. I think this is something actually needs to be in training when people start jobs. And like I said, it's another thing that Next Gen are looking at. We're looking at literally everything. People might not know what a microaggression is, so I'll just give a few examples, some that I've had. At one of my old jobs, I went into work, a colleague of mine had been on holiday, came back, put his arm up next to mine and said, "Oh, look, I'm as Black as you." Now, that's acceptable to some people, they don't see an issue with it, but to me, why does it, I just don't understand it. Like, to a person of colour, it's just weird, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, what are you trying to say? Like, is it a competition? Like, we don't get it. Another one that I get is this your real hair? How long is your real hair? If I've got extensions in. If I have got extensions in, how do they do it? I mean, I would never go up to a white person and say, "Is that your real hair?" So why is it being done to a Black person? Because it's different. It just doesn't make any sense. And then I think the worst one that I get is, "You're not really Black, are you?" Because I am only mixed race, I'm half Black, I'm half white. And that is one of the most offensive comments that I've ever experienced in my life, because it almost takes away from who I am by saying I'm not really, and it's almost an insult. Like, what if I was full Black? Like, is there an issue with that? There's not. So that's just a few of my personal experience with microaggressions, but it can be so many different things. And like I said, it really needs to be taught and trained. And I think what's important when it comes to diversity and racism in the workplace is to break down the aspects, like the things that I've been through, the menial things, because they all interlink and, you know, create the bigger problem. And also, you know, a lot of brands and companies, corporate businesses have been speaking out since the whole Black Lives Matter movement restarted again, George Floyd. And I think it's time for them to, you know, really ask themselves if the way that they work internally, does it align with what they're claiming that they support? So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say on that today. Obviously, if anyone in here has got any questions or anything, I'm open to that.
Thanks, Shan, so much. Yeah, and you covered a lot there as well, which is all really important to kind of flag up. And I think giving examples of, like, just some of that stuff just seems so ridiculous, and it just seems that people just don't seem to get it. And I think you're absolutely right. I know from following what Next Gen have been doing, that education is something that you're looking at. Do you want, because I know you've had some meetings like related, do you want to mention that? Is that useful?
Yeah, I'll just briefly touch on Next Gen and what we're focusing on. So we've got our ethos, which is the 4 E's. So it's education, engagement, employment, and empowerment. So education, obviously, we're looking at how we can revamp the curriculum and decolonize it. Engagement, I think was the next one I said, is all about the community, you know, workshops for the youth, helping them gain the skills to lead them to a better future, a better career path, and prevent them from going down, you know, the wrong route. Employment is obviously what I've just spoke about, diversity, inclusion, equality. And empowerment is all about empowering the younger generation. For example, you know, younger Black girls, getting them to love their self and love their hair and love their skin and everything that they're in. So one of the things that we're working on is a natural hair workshop, which will be led by myself and one of the other co-founders of Next Gen. We've both actually recently gone natural with our hair, so we get it. We completely get it, and we thought it would be an amazing thing to do because we made so many mistakes in the past by thinking that our natural hair was not beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a few things that obviously Next Gen's working on, and that's our 4 E's.
Great, thank you. Ravi's added a question into the YouTube. Do you want to just put that to Shan yourself, Ravi?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, do you think that mixed race is often a group that's ignored when it comes to conversations about racism or racial groups?
Yeah, I think it completely depends. Me personally, I haven't had that many experiences where I felt left out, kind of thing. I mean, I have by white people, but not necessarily black people, but I have mixed race friends who have, you know, they're mixed race, but they have maybe predominantly white features, and that means that they're looked at differently as maybe I would be, because I've got black features from the black community, but then also they're a bit too dark for the white community. So I think, yeah, sometimes we feel a bit in the middle and we don't know where we stand. But I feel like as long as you know who you are inside and what you stand for and what you want to fight for, then, you know, forget what everyone else has got to say and just keep moving forward.
Anissa, did you have a question or a comment?
So everybody's been hiding from like Black Lives Matter, and then at home, me, my mum and Subhan, we were watching a documentary about Malcolm X and what he went through just because he was black, and like documentaries of other black people and just schools that think they're racist. And then, well, me and my uncle went town yesterday, and on our way we saw so many Black Lives Matter posters, and then I showed my uncle and he was actually really happy about it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's the kind of impact that we want to keep having on people. And, you know, people who respond in that way, that's what we want. And these are the people that we need to embrace. They're just not the normal people, not the ones who aren't normal and have different ideologies. But yeah, that's really great to hear.
Thank you for commenting. I'm just going to ask, did anyone else have any comments or other comments or questions for Shan? Thank you so much, Shan. Just checking on YouTube. Also, I'm just going to flag up Emily. So we've had a question here from on YouTube, just asking about, someone's asked what white colleagues could do to support their co-workers better, and I think there are lots of things, and I think white colleagues need to like listen to what those things are, but also I guess I'm answering this because I'm a white colleague, but also just in terms of kind of from a person, like, yeah, I think it's kind of like this kind of combination of listening but also self-educating, and maybe just kind of asking people and being direct and saying, like, you know, paying attention and kind of being direct and saying, you know, are the situations in which I can help, because it's or just becoming aware. I think that's the thing, like you were just mentioning, Shan, about people kind of just not being aware of these microaggressions, and perhaps that you're having to kind of go through official channels without support from other colleagues and that kind of thing, and just sort of like fostering help and maybe speaking up for people. I don't know if anyone else on the call would like to respond to that. Don't feel you have to do at all.
Sorry, can I just quickly?
Yeah, please do.
I feel like I'm speaking too much.
No,
I don't know if people have seen on Instagram, but a lot of my white friends especially have been posting, you know, it's not enough to not be racist, anti-racist. Yeah. So yeah, like you said, listening to your black friends, your black colleagues, and just understanding where they're coming from, but also fighting their corner, just having their back, pretty much. Yeah.
I think that's important. I'm just sorry, YouTube is a little bit behind and I'm certainly confusing me. Does anyone else have any other questions for Shan before we move on? Okay, I'm going to move on so that we can get through everybody. Thank you so much, Shan. Feel free to stay on the call or just watch along on YouTube. It's up to you. I'm going to move on now to Jagdish. Also, just to say, maybe Emily, who is watching from Primary, could just flag up Next Gen's website in the YouTube feed, in our chat. That would be cool. I hope Emily doesn't mind me asking her to do that.
Sorry, we don't have a website yet. It's in construction.
How can we follow what you do?
Our Instagram page.
Cool. And that's at Next Gen Movement. Is that right?
I think there's an underscore in there, maybe. Sorry, let me just check.
Underscores are important. Let's just check.
Yeah, so it's Next Gen Movement _ at the end.
Cool, lovely. Okay, and I think also we have, when we've shared the event, we have also mentioned Next Gen Movement. So check Primary's social media channels out. Lots of thank yous on YouTube for your talk, Shan. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Jagdish now. And do you want to share your screen, Jagdish?
Sure.
I'm going to make. Does that mean I have to make you host? How does it work?
I think you do.
Okay. So sorry about the you are now host.
Cool.
Go for it.
So I was going to, so you don't have to look at me all the time. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So if Sean's from the Next Gen, I'm from some previous old gen, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the work we're doing. Hopefully, maybe link up. I don't know, but we've had this idea of setting up something called the Nottingham People's Pantry, and it comes from a charity, a local charity called Ek-uh-nom-iks, who've been working on food poverty for over 5 or 6 years. They helped set up the Shalom Kitchen, which is still going in High Street Green. It's the first collaboration between the Muslim and Jewish community, probably, certainly in the Midlands, maybe even wider. It's been serving weekly meals for the last 6 years. And over the last year, we've been developing a hot meal service at the Thomas Helwyn Baptist Church, which is just around the corner from Primary. Most of the religious buildings, as you know, have all closed, so we can't provide hot meals anymore. But we're still doing providing food meals out to people and food bank. The other thing they do, because we obviously majority of the employees come from a Black or Muslim background, we work on hate crime and Islamophobia, and we do various art projects within the BAME community. I say we, I'm a volunteer there. So this is the meals being prepared and some of the food that's been collected. So since lockdown started in March till a couple of weeks ago, we have sent out over 2,500 deliveries to local families, mostly local people in NG7. We're part of the food bank system in Nottingham, and the way it was distributed is different organisations have different postcodes. So this is our postcode. It doesn't just stay in that postcode, but that's primarily where we are. Some of it's food parcels, some of it's hot meals, which is a massive growth. Every food organisation in East Mid Nottingham has had a massive increase of demand, and for a variety of reasons, because obviously a lot of people are now on 0-hour contracts, and when the work stops, the employment, the money stops, or people have had delays in benefits and things like that. Most of this work has been done by volunteers, which are students for furloughed staff from other organisation or retired people. But we've managed to keep it going, and still managing to keep it going. The referrals come from across Nottingham in different organisations. Any organisation can refer, so Primary could refer people to them. We're lucky that we have a good supply of food now. That if people do want to refer per people, please do. We can serve them. And there's the number there. And if you go to himmer.co.uk, you can get the details from there. So what we're thinking about, what happens next? Because now people are starting to go back to work. There's an expectation that from July, there's going to be there's certainly people who are going to have reduced hours in some places because the social distancing means there might be less people around needed and around. Some people have anxiety and don't want to go back to work. There's extended school holidays, which makes it difficult to people, and there's obviously people being laid off. So there's going to be, we think, an increased demand for quite a long time. So what we're going to do is set up, apart from doing the food bank system, we're setting up the system which we've called the food pantry, which is people pay £5 and in return they get £40 worth of food back. And we can do that because we get subsidised or food given to us by larger organisations. So it was a way of helping people out to pay the bills, basically, is what we're trying to do. And what we'd like to do longer term is to think about how, not rather than just give out and provide food assistance to food poverty, is help people on a range of different issues around advocacy, around welfare, employment and housing issues, doing stuff on wellbeing, anxiety, and it's shocking how many people can't cook, but thinking of ways to teach people to cook, which we don't have the facilities, but that's something we would like to do. And we're thinking of doing a summer school in Sneinton just to specifically target, there's a huge Gambian community, a black community in Sneinton, but specifically target kids with maths, English and black and Asian history in that area as a summer school tester. And one of the other things we're doing is, we know, I mean, obviously everybody knows that black communities have been disproportionately affected by the COVID, but it's just some type of audit, a quick audit to see how bad the situation is, because the data collection and the people's experiences aren't necessarily logged properly. So that's the type of stuff we're doing. So when we say the People's Pantry, it's a system of doing a collection of different things. None of it's particularly well funded. In fact, none of it's funded at the moment. We're doing bits and pieces here and there with volunteers, but it's a vision that we're trying to implement that we know we can do this year, but we will see how it goes in future years. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why somebody from primary does this type of work as someone as a freelance artist. I know I've got to know him through, because we did some work with them over the last few years on a project called When the Snow Melts. And what the snow melts is about was recording the experiences of Black and Asian families from Nottingham who were involved in the Second and First World Wars. A lot of people from West Africa, Caribbean and India. And when we say India, it's independence India, so it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. But the Indian army came from Saudi Arabia near Yemen. It was a much bigger contingency. So recording their family experiences, then we had an exhibition. And what we did, the way we thought about it was, rather than say World War I, World War II, and there's plots of peace in between, everyone was happy. It wasn't really like that. We wanted people to think about that period of time. There's a famous book, I can't remember, written by an English author who looks at English history from the mid-30s up to 1947. And when it starts changing the boundaries of where the war ends, you get a slightly different version of history. When we looked at we looked at the whole thing as one unit, because the story of the First World War is a story of the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire and the battle between different countries to take over the Ottoman Empire. In the interwar period, the fighting never really stops in Europe, and you can see in Europe all the boundaries changing. But in Africa, Caribbean and India, there's major suppression going on of any sort of revolt or anti-colonial movement. And the Second World War is the English and the French empires breaking down. So there's a slightly different story if you look at the war from a different perspective. And we're trying to tell it from a different perspective. And at the same time, celebrate Black and Asian soldiers from the empire who were fighting for the British. So it's quite a complicated story, but we were trying to present it in a way that included people. One of the things we wanted to do with the exhibition was to talk about food poverty and make it relevant. People might not know, but as many people died from starvation during the Second World War as they did in military deaths, and food and malnutrition and related diseases still kill more people than military deaths, which is an important point when you start thinking about who should be memorialized. So we all know about what the National Socialists did to the Jewish community, and that but we don't necessarily talk about the death of Africans through starvation, or Indians. There's 3.5 million Indians who died, not necessarily because there wasn't food around, it's because the access to food was denied because different people prioritized. And that issue of who's included as citizenship and who has access to food is something we wanted to really bring home, because when we think about what's happening in today's world, you know, the issues of poverty, race and human rights are interlinked in that way, and food is part of that system. The picture is the local flats near Primary, where someone called El died last year, 2 years ago, through starvation because his benefits were cut. So the other thing I've been doing over the last few years is working on mental health and photography. There's loads of research to show that mental health and art-based activities are good for mental well-being in terms of dealing with confidence, anxiety, or social skills, and in the whole idea of mindfulness as well. So we run a self-help peer group, and we wanted to bring a photography-based activity into the food bank. So when the Arts Council announced their COVID support, we very cheekily applied to them to do photography-based work with the food bank, and we were a bit shocked, but they gave us a grant to buy food, and we'll have a few weekly classes. So we run this weekly online class now. This is one of the photos where people log on. I give them activities to do or get them to think about things, and then they go away, do the work, and then they come back and they send it to me before the class, and we show it online. It's a way of keeping people active and thinking about stuff. We have one group that meet weekly, and a few people don't like coming onto the Zoom meetings, so we do that through email system, and we're looking for people. We're going to start another group in August. And now the restrictions have lifted slightly. We've started seeing people in local parks and meeting them, because I think for people who are anxious, this is a very bad time for people who are anxious, but for people who are anxious, I think physically seeing people or physically seeing people online has become really vital. Some people don't see anybody in between the weeks. These are some of the pictures that people have been taking at home. Most of the activities are sort of home-based or near the home-based. The other thing I'm involved in, which I just wanted to mention, is I'm working with a group of people in Birmingham, and we've set up a network for Midlands-based visual artists who work in photography. And we've got a bit of money from Birmingham City, New Art Exchange, and some other organisations, and we're currently advertising for people to apply. We've got 5 bursaries to give away to do some work between August and September. The web link is at the bottom there. It's reframe.uk. And the idea, we're helping people, we're going to mentor people. There's a group of us who are going to mentor people to produce work. We're going to publish the work in a publication. The New Art Exchange work will get what's shown on their platform, and same with the Birmingham City University work. And we're also going to do some workshops and mentor people, but we are collecting stories of how Black communities or Black and Asian communities have been coping during COVID in the Midlands, because we know that those stories might probably get lost in time, in 5 or 10 years' time, and we wanted to sort of document those experiences. And there's a combination of interviews, collecting stories, but also doing freedom of information question and collecting data on how things are going. And in Nottingham, that feeds into that race audit work, where we're specifically collecting data on a number of indicators we think are important. Like the level of hate crime against Chinese people has increased dramatically. And if you look at the data in March, it goes zoom up. The level of stop and searches under lockdown has increased dramatically, we should be shocked about. But it's sort of, we look trying to figure out what's been happening and collecting stories. This follows, I mean, I've been involved in anti-racist work for a while. We did some work with Primary in 2018, not 16, sorry, which looked at the history of anti-racism in Nottingham from 1900 to 2017, and we did an exhibition there. This is some of the images from that exhibition, and we did a walk and talk around the local area. We walked around NG7, and actually it's quite interesting the stories you get and the interconnection between different communities you get along the routes. I've always had a thing that we should try and feed people, so we fed the peoples whose portraits we had on the wall in the gallery space at Primary as a way of engaging with people. So I think part of the art process is also getting people involved in actually being physically in the gallery space and doing and talking and doing things rather than just looking at the work. That work has continued. So we've been going around Nottingham collecting stories of the elders. We've got this massive piece of wallpaper that you can see on that top image, where we're logging the histories from the 30s up to the mid 80s. So this is a meeting at the Pilgrim Church with elders, and that lady, Miss Anderson's, realised that she was involved in this organisation in the 50s and put her name down. And the bottom image is a memorial event that was held last year for someone called Muhammad Aslam, who was one of the first Pakistani councillors, quite active in Raleigh and other things in the city. He lived on Sealy Road. His children went to the school. So we've been collecting our stories, and the idea is that we were going to work with Contemporary to do a little project, but that's on hold because the funding stopped and the Contemporary is closed. But that will develop at some stage, in a way. And these ideas aren't new. I just wanted to point out that Black Panthers have been doing the teaching stuff since the 60s. It's the idea of artists working with educationalists and working on civil rights has been around since the 1930s. It's not particularly new, but you know, we're sort of reviving and keeping some of those collaboration and ideas going in a modern world, which seems to be going backwards. There you go. Hope that's useful.
I think the mic's mute.
So it was, sorry. I was frantically trying to unmute it and couldn't find the thing. Thank you, Jagdish. That's really useful. Yeah, really good to link back to the project that the exhibition and walks and talks that took place at Primary. And I know we've been talking about whether or how it's possible to kind of link back to those now, or look at the kind of content for those and how we can share it again, because there was so much research that you did in and around Radford and Lenton. It'll be really good to share. I'm just going to check if is anyone in our Zoom meeting have any questions for Jagdish currently? Could you put it on?
Do you think like there's been a recent resurgence and interest in photography and about immigrant groups or Black and Asian groups? I've noticed there's been lots of books that have been coming out in the UK about the kind of story. And do you think we could do a modern one of those, or is there a need for it?
I think we're at a different level in some ways. There's lots of people posting stuff and things like that. What's shocking is the lack of material from Britain. There's lots of if you go to a lot of galleries and see the lists, it's all American stuff. There isn't a massive back catalogue of things that have been commissioned in this country in the same way as there is in the States. There's photographs, books about Black and Asian communities, which looks at the history through documentary or newspaper. Most of those images will be taken by white photographers of Black communities, and it's not necessarily that they're not bad pictures, but it's the way that the communities are seen is from a white perspective, from the Black, then rather than a Black perspective. And there's a time now, I think, where people should be able to think about how do you tell the story from within Black communities by themselves. And the work is there. I mean, the resurgence of the last few years in that area has been through family photography and archives and things like that. And we touching things, but there's Black photographers has been doing this type of work for years, and I mean there is that stuff. So there is a resurgence, and I think there is a need to document that history properly. There's a tendency for people to think that immigration started after Windrush in the late 40s, where the first the first Pan-African conference was in 1900, which is the first time one of the big community groups came together from different Black and Asian communities came together in this country. But there's a massive history throughout the 1920s and 30s, even in Nottingham. So, go on.
Oh, I've just got related to that. I've just got a question on, a couple of questions on YouTube. Becky says, thanks for sharing all that history. It feels very relevant. Can you tell us a bit more about the Black roots of community organising and mutual aid? Is that something you'd be happy to kind of expand on a little bit?
Gosh, in Nottingham or anywhere?
I think anywhere.
Actually, on the 6th of June, I'll tell you a little story. On the 6th of June in 1919, there was the first race riot. There was race riots all over the country because the English soldiers come back from the war. There's no jobs, and there's mass unemployment. There's no housing, and there's race riots in Liverpool, South Shields, Cardiff, London, Glasgow. They are supported by the labour movements. Not everyone in the labour movement, because it was a way of bringing their English workers into their fold. And so it's a similar sort of dynamic to Brexit in some ways. But in Liverpool, a Black guy from Trinidad, from Bermuda, died. And the campaign around his death was, I suppose, the first recording of all the different groups coming together. There's been Black communities have always supported each other through mutual aid systems, whether it's getting food into this country to feed themselves because that food wasn't available in the shops, or whether it's to do with giving out loans to buy houses, or whether it's it's been a integral part of survival. So, I mean, I don't know if it was ever called mutual aid, but that history is never really written. So the history of, for example, Black community groups doing art isn't part of the narrative on community arts, for example, at all. Same as the history of mutual aid. It doesn't really include the Black community because a lot of that stuff is just not being documented properly. But there is a big history to be written in that respect. The supplementary school system, which is a reaction to the number of schools that were Black kids that weren't educated properly or just kicked out of school. That's always been an integral part of survival. Nottingham's got quite a good history. I mean, one of the earliest food banks in Nottingham was at the Pilgrim Church, which fed the Black communities in the early 70s, I think. So, I mean, there's a long history, and the people that are still around to tell you that history from the 60s onwards still, but it goes back in further.
Thank you. Thanks for responding to that. I've got another question for you from YouTube, from Nikki. What do you think about the difference between progressive versus radical food justice, i.e. the difference between advocating for food banks and campaigning for policies that eliminate the need for them? I guess this is something we often kind of all experience as we're choosing to support different things, and yeah, aware that of the kind of yeah, the kind of complexity of that. I don't know if that's something you feel able to respond to.
Oh, you have to do both. I mean, we've always done both. One doesn't negate the other. We don't. You have to feed people, because otherwise, I mean, the sad story is that when the schools are closed, kids starve. I mean, that is shocking in this country. But so you have to. When parents split up, if one parent doesn't provide money properly to the other parent, then it's literally desperation. So you have to. We do that because but that doesn't negate the need to campaign to do the other stuff, which we know, and we present. I mean, we talk about it as a human rights issue, and certainly in Western Europe, it should be a human rights issue. Access to food then impacts on everything else, and and it's something. I mean, the big revolutions in Tunisia and the Arab Spring started with a man burning himself because he couldn't feed himself. It's internationally recognised in that, I think.
Thank you for responding to that. A couple of thank yous. Oh, thank you. Another thank you for Shan on YouTube as well. I think people are watching, kind of watching back, basically catching up on what's been happening. Unless there are any questions, other questions for Jagdish, I'm going to move us on to Anaya and Sapan, who have very helpfully been waiting. Thank you, Jagdish. And yeah, we'll hopefully be able to share more of the project and the People's Pantry as it develops and kind of over the summer. And yeah, and Primary obviously will be helping to share that stuff as well. Thank you.
And if people know people who need access to food, they just email him or email me, we'll sort it out.
Yeah, and yeah, I think also that can come, I guess that can come either through you. And I think Emily's shared the website in the HIMA website in the YouTube chat here. So if people would like to find out more about that in terms of referrals, I know there's a referrals process on the website, but also the photography project as well. Yeah. Another thank you from Jagdish on YouTube. I'm going to move on to Anaya and Sapan, who've been waiting there. You guys did a talk for us a couple of years ago, which we just shared online a couple of weeks ago, actually. I've heard a little bit from your mum, but what was that like, hearing your talk back that you did in Radford Library?
Very exciting.
Very exciting. Good.
I feel like I needed to improve now.
Okay. Well, now's the time. I feel like you're going to be amazing speakers after doing so many of these. Make sure you speak up, just so that we can make sure it hit the YouTube and everything else can hear you. That's the one thing to just mention. So I've called your talk Stories from Lockdown, because when I chatted with your mum about what you'd like to talk about, there were so many things you've been doing. It felt like a collection of kind of lots of stories. But to start off with, when you spoke at Radford and Lenton Library, you talked about what you get up to with Scouts. And I wondered if I know you've been doing some Scout stuff during lockdown. Could you tell us a little bit about what kind of Scout activities you've been doing during lockdown and how maybe that's different to usual?
Well, loads of people all across the world have been taking part in an activity online that includes making care packages and food packages for the people during COVID-19 who can't cope with it. And then all the Scout leaders were delivering it, and my mum delivered it as well. And then in the beginning of lockdown, some people in Scouts made a video of them kicking toilet roll to the next person, and it kept going on and on and on until the last person.
It was very fun until we had to go inside because I kicked a lot of toilet paper over the fence
to our neighbours
for free.
Over the fence. And
Yeah.
what did you use to make the video? Do you remember?
We just used toilet roll and just kicked it, and it kept going with other people.
I think we may have to the wonders of technology, I think we may have that video that we can share with everyone. I think it's what was it called? The TikTok, what was it called?
The TikTok toilet roll challenge.
TikTok toilet roll challenge. Just give the technician opposite me is just pulling up the video. So in a second, we will just play that for everybody to see. This is it's a new realm for us. Can you talk what? Sorry, carry on.
Also, scouts all over the world have been participating in a virtual camp and
Virtual sessions,
yeah,
just to catch up with their friends. And then in the virtual camp, we all made like forts, and we had like fancy lights and pillows, and just made it as comfortable as we could because we were at home.
And then I thought the camp was so real that all the bugs I tried swatting away.
And then during the session to catch up on, we are showing all of our friends, and I showed my friends this.
Wow, can you put it a bit closer? That's amazing.
How long did it take you to do?
I don't know, well, it took me I did it one day, and then I missed a few days, and then I did it for maybe 2-3 days.
And how many people took part in the virtual camp with you? Was that all around the world?
Well, there were loads of different camps, and it just varied in numbers.
I think it was 200 the first day, wasn't it?
200 the first day, and then
it reduced to about 180 the second.
Yeah.
And it got all the way down to about 30 people. Was that right?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
So it went from 230 to 30.
As they were kind of doing days, because they did it over a week, didn't they?
Because they were doing certain days, and then not many people wanted to do all the days.
Yeah, they just wanted to do a few.
You tell them what activities you did during the virtual camp. So we did some cooking.
We did baking or cooking.
Yeah.
We did loads of challenges.
Did TED Talks.
TED Talks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Talked about what we were doing in lockdown.
Yeah.
And everything.
And we read books to each other.
Yeah, we like reading stories to each other, just random ones we found.
So which do you prefer, virtual camp, or do you prefer the real thing?
I prefer the real thing.
The real thing? Yeah, cool.
You just mentioned stories, which is going to allow me to segue into asking Anaya about the short story that you have written during lockdown. Can you tell us a little about the story and why you wrote it?
So during lockdown, I've been doing a lot of reading and writing, just random stuff. And then I've been reading The Explorer, just as an extra book. And then I don't know how many people were doing this, but my mom found this competition, and then you could write a poem or a short story or a story about yourself or a made up story. I decided to do a story about myself when I went to London for a recce before camp, just to see what it was like, and then went around London to see what there was. It was really, really fun.
And do you know what the award is that you have submitted it to? Can you remember? It's called.
I think they publish.
The Young Muslims Writers.
It's the Young Muslims Writer, and as a reward, they publish your book, and then just put it in a bookshop, I think.
And when will you find out if you've won?
In October.
In October.
Okay.
Cool. Do you want me to?
Yeah, let's have a bit.
After a few minutes, the train stopped. It was really quick. We walked onto the platform and looked around for signposts. All we saw were people wearing different colour clothes, some with ruffles, some without, some flared, some not, some bright, some dull.
That was great. That's a good opening. It's a kind of intriguing. I kind of want to hear the rest of the story. It's a very nice opening. I'm going to move on now to Sapan. because I know you've been busy during lockdown. Can you tell us what you've been building during lockdown?
So I've been building a lot of stuff. So first I built the Lego Batman. And the best thing I like about it is all the moving parts, such as the guns, which are shootable. And then in the back here, you can put like a flame, Lego flame, and then if you move the tires, it moves. And also the spaceship has its like opening bits, so you can put, so that you can put like compartments in, like, and then yeah, I even though it took some time, I really love it.
And what are you building anything currently?
No.
What about the mosque that we're going to get?
Yeah, we're gonna get a mosque, and then
Like a paper mache kind of.
yeah,
It's like a paper jigsaw one, isn't it?
paper jigsaw.
It's like a
3D
3D
paper
jigsaw.
jigsaw. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing us that. I like that you're both making different things in different ways. It's pretty exciting. The last thing I was going to ask you about was about the video you made during Ramadan. Do you want to explain to people about that? Because we have got that video to show in a minute. Can you explain about it? Explain about it. Tell us about it. Sorry.
So it's an Arabic prayer that prays the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all we did was learn 20 seconds of the clip that someone else did, and we only did it for the people who can't hear and they struggle with hearing and they only use sign languages, only because it's easier for them.
Yeah.
And was it hard to learn?
Not really. You learn a little bit, and you each got sections, and all the adults edited it together.
And the hand movements were important because if we got it wrong, then it might have said something that we weren't supposed to say.
So that's important as well. And how many people did it all together?
12.
I think like about 12.
I think it's 9. I think. 9, I think.
I think 12 people were supposed to do it, but only 9 ended up doing it.
Okay. And shall we play the video now?
Sure.
So your mum sent the video, so we're going to play the video now, so people on YouTube will be able to see it and hopefully hear it too. Just a second. You won't be able to see it because it's going out on YouTube, but it is going out. More questions at the end.
أشوفك في المنام يا رسول الله، وابكي على كتفك وانام يا حبيب الله، وانول شرف لقى صحبتك وخطي في صفوف امتك واتحامى فيك.
And we're live, we're back in the room. Thank you. It was a really great video, which I really enjoyed, and I hope everyone else did too. I wondered whether you got, so my last question was what you've got coming up next. Have you got any other projects planned?
The 99 names of Allah, do you want to say that?
Oh, 99 names of Allah. So we all learn the names of Allah and then after we'll sing it.
So it'd be a bit of a choir, wouldn't it?
Yeah, with like all of our friends and
Family members.
Yeah.
And all of the scout people, most of them, we're all just going to go to one place and social distance, but we're all going to learn this. It's like a song, but it's a nasheed, and we're all going to learn it, and then we're going to record it in like a choir form. It's going to be pretty fun.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much for joining us for Tell Me Something I Don't Know. Expert, veteran Tell Me Something speakers. Thank you also, Anissa, for being a camera person.
Welcome.
And for helping us out. I'm just going to check whether there are any questions on YouTube. I'm not sure that there are, because I've no questions on YouTube. No. No. Okay. We're going to move on. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to move on to Angela now. Hi, Angela.
I have to remember every time to unmute myself.
Thank you. I'm going to let, we had a little chat earlier on, but I'm going to let you speak, and it'd be great if you introduced what you do in the area as well. So yeah, it's all yours.
Thank you. My name is, Angela, as Rebecca said it. I work for, I would say very many organizations, but at the moment, working with Mojato Foundation and another organization called Fearless Youth Association. So at the moment, we doing COVID-19 food packs. We've been doing that since the lockdown started. And during the Ramadan season, we provided hot meals to different people in the city and the county. So it was about 700 meals in a period of 4 weeks. Apart from that, we are doing other stuff in the organization. So we do a lot of training programs and different other projects. So in the training programs, we do digital media, which is photography, videography, radio, web design, and then other aspects of healthcare and hospitality, driving theory, and English class. So other than that, I would say we have a challenge that we have at the moment that's going on, which is called Fearless and Loud. Hashtag Fearless and Loud, which is on our FYA Notes Instagram page and Twitter. So about Fearless and Loud is just a challenge whereby we are asking different people from the Black community what their Blackness means to you and why is it's necessary for you to be, fearless and loud and vocal, and for you to talk about different things that happen, from the talk that Shan made earlier on, it's really important that we get to understand the importance of, you know, Black lives, and also the disparity in the workplace, which is usually such a big thing, not just in the workplace, but all over in the community. There are some parts in the city or in the county where you go as a Black person, you cannot go in, you know, but that's a whole other conversation. So today, I would like to talk about some sort of textiles that we do from Kenya. I'm from Kenya originally, and we usually do some textiles, and it's like some beaded and trying to mix some colors together. So one thing that I have is like a bag. I don't know if you guys can see it. No? Can you? No? It's doing something. But hopefully you can. So you're saying something, Rebecca. I can't hear what you're saying, but it's okay.
We can see it. Yeah, just to say we can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we usually do these bags, and they're usually from Kenya. And then we have some small, it's like a vase. It's like that. So it's really nice beaded. So we're trying to link up with the projects in Kenya, with this type of projects, with the bags and the beaded. We're trying to link up, trying to get a way in which we can be able to sort of encourage the young people and the women and girls who are usually sort of in the village. They have amazing creativity skills. They know what they're doing, and they just want, let's say, their artwork and their creativity out there. So in the last 1 year, we've been having trips to Kenya with some of the partner organizations here, whereby now we go to Kenya and then see the local communities, try to see where we can get opportunities, and if they are, how we can be able to help them. So also apart from that, trying to see how we can be able to reach out to the partner organizations back in Kenya to be able to see how, you know, even the training programs, how people can be helped. And I think like even the online training programs is something that is sort of the normal norm right now, even with lockdown coming on, because like situation in Kenya is that for all the schools that are there, the schools are going to be closed permanently until January next year. So, you know, the learning has kind of stopped. So we are trying to see how, with all this free time that students have, how can we be able to see that the young people who are at home, and we are able to encourage them to do something, they can be able to do something and then not fall back onto other different illegal affairs, because then it's different from here, because everybody is being laid off from work at home, and you don't have like the furlough scheme or something else to bounce back on, because everything in a home is usually like hand to mouth. So you just have just a small bit of savings that you have, maybe maximum, maybe a month. After that, then you have to look at how you can be able to fend for yourself. So I'd say that is something that we've been working on, and to be able to say link up the activities that we have in Kenya and at home. We usually have like an annual farm festival here, which is in a farm in Scriviton, this farm here. Hopefully people can see it. So we have about 1,500 people who come to the farm. Last year we had 1,500 people come to the farm, whereby we're able to showcase the stuff that we're doing in the UK and in Kenya, and then have performers who are coming to perform from literally all over the UK. And last year, but one, it was really great for us because we had the Maasai Cricket Warriors, and it was amazing because then it was a whole tour for us, and they went to different cities, different towns, and then we had a very good itinerary, just building up the relationships that we had before. So in a nutshell, I think I have sort of finished what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Angela. There's so much you do, Amajatu, so much. I'm aware that Fearless Youth Association have a podcast
Yes.
Again, do you want to just talk about that a little bit, and then we can hopefully people can go and find that as well.
Yes, we have. It's one, possibly two, maybe three. I'm not quite sure. I'm not the technical person, you know. I don't know how many channels we have at the moment, but we have a podcast, which is, I think, on Podbean. If you search for FMB Radio on Podbean and Spotify, which talks about different aspects of what we do. So one is mental health among young people during lockdown. So it was kind of what people feel, and that was done during Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May. Apart from that, we have the modern day mulattoes. I think that's what they call themselves, which is a group of young guys who usually talk about issues of racism and Black Lives Matter and everyday circumstances that people usually look alike but usually don't look in depth about. I think that's it. I'm not quite sure if there's anything. Somebody's gonna kill me after this because I didn't say something.
Like, you've shared so much and you do so much as well. I'm really aware. I'm just gonna. So we've just shared the Fearless Youth Association website and Instagram, and the link to the podcast as well on the YouTube, so people can find those. Anybody have any more questions? Any questions for Angela? Shan.
Yes, you mentioned obviously about workshops and ones that are centered around gaining like qualifications. And I was just wondering if you guys do you collaborate with like other organisations or anything? Because we'd definitely be interested in working with Fearless.
Yes. At the moment, we are collaborating with different organizations in the city, which is the council, the Nottingham City Council, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, the Violence Reduction Unit, another funded organization by the ESF called Futures. So with that, then we are able to provide an array of programs for young people, and all of our programs are usually accredited, so it can build up to something more if you want to continue with it. And then after finishing the qualification, then we can be able to signpost you to something more. And if it's a level 2, level 3, then we can tell you that if you go to this organization, you're going to be able to be helped. And then it moves something. And then if we get in our networks that there's somebody who's looking for an employee in a specific kind of job, then we can say post you to, that kind of job.
Yeah, because next gen, we were thinking about doing similar workshops, but if there's already some being run by you guys, then it would make sense for us to signpost you.
Yeah.
So maybe I can take your email and chat.
Yeah.
I can put you in touch if you like.
Yeah, fab.
Yeah, I can do that.
Let me write it here. Hopefully people will see it.
Or we can do it in the chat. Yeah, sorry. Any other questions for Angela before we move on? No? Okay. I'm going to hand over now to Ravi. So as our last speaker, thank you so much, Angela, for sharing all that you do. Extensive amount that you do. I hope people can kind of engage with at least one of those things and kind of pick up on them. Some thank yous in the chat. Okay, Ravi, over to you.
Are you able to enable me to screen share?
I am able to enable. I will enable. One moment. Right. Yeah. There we go.
Good. Okay, let me just. Can you see that?
We can see that, yes.
All right, we're good. Okay, so I'm going to do a little talk, and it's going to be about the disaster communications and kind of emergency situations. So if there was a global disaster, how would we communicate if the digital networks went down? And the main idea is that basically you have to start with the basic principles. So I'm just going to do a quick explanation of how radio works, which will really help this. So radio started in 1885, and it works simply by exciting electrons. So there's electrons in the air, and you create a little burst of electricity. Now, that little burst of electricity creates a circuit between the transmitter and receiver, and that will be a little on and off signal. That basically was the principle for Morse code. So early data was sent over radio. So you can see here that I've got a picture, and this picture is made out of text. Now, this was in the 1900s that people were sending these to each other, and they were usually radio operators that were really bored, and they would be working over Christmas or over the holidays, and they'd end up making these pictures with the text, and it would be sent and then printed out on typewriters. So you could always kind of send data over radios. Let me just stop sharing that one because I've got a lot of images. Wait a second. Oh no, I'll just switch later. But yeah, so radio works with bandwidth and power. So the more power you have going into the transmitter, the greater the signal. And if you choose the correct bandwidth, then you'll change the quality and the distance of transmission. So a lot of people wonder, like, can you send video over it? And if you look at the 1960s, when they went into space, they actually transmitted the moon landings from the moon using slow scan television. And that was a radio signal that was sent from the moon to Earth, and we could receive these images of them coming off and kind of doing the one small step for mankind. Now, the basic principle is that the stronger the signal is, then that person wins. So it's very democratic with radio. And since it started, there have been lots of amateur radio operators. So there's the professionals, the military that use it, but there's also a lot of amateurs. You might remember in the 70s, they had the CB radio, Citizens Band, and they had the truckers, and they'd all communicate on those. Well, these people are often unseen, and they do absolutely amazing things like broadcast around the world, and they use shortwave and longwave, which actually uses the stratosphere around the world to send the signals. Now, they have a basic piece of equipment, which is called a repeater. Now, what a repeater does is it receives the information and then sends it out again. So if you're on one side of the world and you want to communicate with people on the other side, you then connect to this repeater, and that will just send it. And there will hardly be a delay, and that bounces the signal around the world. So these guys kind of see themselves as like the emergency broadcasting system to help out people when the world's in trouble. But with digital phones and technology, they're often ignored, and they're kind of seen as old and irrelevant until September the 11th happened. And the unique thing about September the 11th was there was so many clouds in the air and dust that let me just check I'm sharing the sound. Yes, there's so much cloud and dust in the air that all the digital radios didn't work. So all of these guys who'd been sitting there for years using the amateur band suddenly became the most important guys on the ground because they were communicating the police communications and the fire. So here's a clip.
The 9/11 attacks temporarily wiped out a lot of communication systems. That's when ham radio operators went to work. Andrea Day reports.
When the towers went down, so did almost all forms of communication. That's when the ham radio operators sprang into action.
Once the towers collapsed and everything went black in here, people were just dumbfounded. Everybody's trying to talk at once, and people pick up their cell phones and couldn't get through.
It was a day guys like Charlie Hargrove and Mark Phillips trained for. They communicate on amateur radios, and when disaster strikes, they get messages through when no one else can.
When it finally happens, you just go into automatic. you don't even think about it.
The city was virtually paralyzed, and ham radios were about the only way to talk. So Charlie, Mark, and some 250 volunteers spread out, backing up the city's systems 24 hours a day.
Down at ground zero.
They got word to frantic relatives, worked at shelters, even pulled people off the streets. But they're the ones you don't see or read about.
I wouldn't say that we were heroes. We're doing our job. Just being out there, the sense of being part of the community and just helping out. If I've got the ability and I've got the time, why not?
And that's a true hero.
So these guys are now actually seen as really important worldwide. The Haiti disaster as well, they were absolutely amazing there. And when these huge emergency disasters happen, we have to go back to the kind of foundation technologies, just like radio. Now, satellites are just like these repeaters. They receive information, they send it out again. So there's around 70 in the world at the moment that are being used by amateur radios. And you can even get internet over the satellites or over your radio. So even if they say we've locked off the internet in a country, you can still actually receive it for your radio. So they can't physically stop the internet there. Now, these satellites are starting to get hijacked. And this is a satellite which was sent up in the 1970s called the Fleet satellite. It was part of a set of them. And that was set up by the US Navy. Now, these have been abandoned because the technology is seen as too old for the US Navy to be used, but they're still in rotation around the Earth. So people can now hijack these satellites. So what has happened is in Brazil, there's a lot of people that do logging in the Amazon, and the Brazilian loggers have set up simple satellite dishes to communicate with the old Navy satellites and basically get satellite phone coverage in the Amazon whilst they're logging. So as more satellites have been sent up into the world, so there was a lot sent up in the 80s, in the 90s, they're going to start to get abandoned and decommissioned. And that brings the opportunity for new networks to emerge with amateurs. And, you know, the future of communication in a disaster situation might be somebody with a tiny little dish and a radio, and they can link up to a satellite and just talk to the world. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, this technology from 1885 is still really relevant. And we have all these digital phones, we have these wired internet, but really radio is still the kind of huge principle. And that goes on into all the futuristic stuff that's happening at the moment, even including stuff like Donald Trump's Space Force and China's efforts with satellites at the moment, and also what Amazon going to be doing with their satellite dishes and the 5G network. Yeah, so that's really my talk, and sorry if it was really nerdy.
It wasn't really nerdy, it's really interesting. And when you mentioned it on the phone, you said that one of the, so with the loggers, they're using this kind of technology to sort of circumnavigate kind of being detected, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's also like, you mentioned there are examples where activists are also using it. So it can be used in many ways, but do you have any examples of like activists using it?
At the moment, I'd say quite a lot of insurgents in Iraq have been using it. So even though the military put out, they have their drone footage, live feeds from the drones, and they still don't encrypt them. It's not standard practice to encrypt anything. So actually, if you do have a satellite dish, you can sit up and watch the live footage. You can do that. But recently, insurgents have been actually interrupting that and fooling the drones into thinking that they're too high and forcing them to land. I don't know of any art pieces that have done with it, but they have an amazing thing, which is it's basically that when the International Space Station passes in Earth, you can actually get your own radio and communicate with the ISS. So as the ISS has been passing over Britain for 3 minutes in that short period of time, people will go out into car parks and they'll start talking to Tim Peake on the radio whilst he's on his amateur kit, and they'll be able to talk to them. So there's lots of stuff about exclusive interaction with guys in space and stuff like that, but you need to be licensed to operate it, and it's all very you've got to do a test and exams, and you've got to have the right language whilst you're operating on a radio. But the principles have been the same since those early days.
Thank you. It's really fascinating, and just kind of just sort of the fact that as we kind of keep going, it's kind of like in these weird sort of disaster situations or moments of kind of chaos that analog radio is what kind of keeps going. It's kind of it's kind of amazing, but also just amazing the sort of I guess the different kinds of groups that can use that technology in for like kind of really fantastic ways to kind of be undetected, to do a positive stuff, but undetected to also kind of obviously not do positive stuff. It's really interesting. Any questions for Ravi? I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. Any questions from our little group of speakers? No.
It's not.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Well, I guess it is a question. What is it that you do, Ravi? I don't think.
I'm a like technology podcaster, so I've got a podcast where we talk about retro video games, but we also get a lot of people on that are involved in technology. So we had some of the guys that helped do the original foundation of the internet, and that was meant to be a huge thing to stop, to be a system that would survive nuclear war. And it turns out that was absolute rubbish. The only reason that they did that was so that they could talk to the military who had the money and kind of get the internet put out. Like it never would have survived any kind of apocalypse. But yeah, I talk to a lot of people. So that's the Retro Hour podcast. And I think we're on episode 232 at the moment, which is yeah.
We've just posted. Sorry, we've just posted the link to your podcast. Sorry, Ravi, I should have introduced you as a podcaster at the start. Oh, hang on a sec. I'm just going to check. We've not got any questions. Oh, I've got a question from Sapan, who spoke earlier on. Would like to know how you get into something like that. So I guess he's talking about kind of technology and podcasting.
Yeah, I've always kind of had a passion for it, but I've always wanted to talk to these people as they've been like my heroes, and then hearing the story from those kind of guys really makes you actually think, because a lot of people don't talk to the people. They just get the same Wikipedia article or the same story that everybody else has got. But if you hear it from somebody, you're going to hear a different path of how they got into this stuff. And a lot of the time you're told, oh, this happens with technology. You have to go to this university. You have to do this. And a lot of the time it's totally different what you assume kind of happens. And the way that the world works is very different to what I originally thought before I started all of this.
Thank you. Any more questions for Ravi before we sign off? No more questions online, just some thank yous in the chat and a link. So we have, I think we've done links now. So this video will stay up on YouTube, and in it are links to Next Gen Movement, to HIMA and Jagdish's project. There are the videos that Anaya and Sapan shared. There's links to Fearless Youth Association and their podcast. And then there's Ravi's Retro Hour is also linked there as well. So hopefully if something's been of interest, you can find out more and like connect with people a little bit more. Thank you all so much for speaking and for bearing with me and the technology, and kind of just being so generous with your time. We'd normally have a meal now where we'd share some food and we could talk some more. Hopefully when we are back in person at Primary, we can see you all in person maybe and have that meal then. Thank you for everyone who's been following online, for your questions. And yeah, I think if that's, yeah, I just want to say thank you and bye, I guess. Yeah, hopefully see you in real life at some point. Thank you all. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Cheers. Bye.